So welcome to It's Not All About the Numbers, the leadership podcast that doesn't just focus on the bottom line. Hi, my name is Chris Argent, and today I'm here all by myself. Mike is probably somewhere in Ethiopia, and we have a slightly different week this week that all around the world, leaders, individuals will be talking about Mental Health Awareness Week. And we've always been very open about our own styles, our own strengths and weaknesses on this podcast. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to be able to share some of our content. And you sometimes hear me talking about Generation CFO, which is a community that I run. And part of that community is a huge summit that we put on every year. It's called the GENCFO Summit. It's actually on next week if you're interested in joining. But last year we had a session with three great leaders who were prepared to talk about mental health, mental fitness and burnout, and actually how to avoid it with lots of tips and tricks. And we thought it would be a good opportunity to share that with you this week. So this is definitely not all about the numbers. So very much on brand. And I'm sure, like you will be missing Mike and the usual chat. But hopefully there's a lot for you to take away from this podcast. A very special week. So have a great week. Remember, it's not all about the numbers. And maybe this week, above all others, just check in on yourself, check in on your team, and make sure everybody is doing well. Take care. Enjoy the pod. So we have Hester Scotton, CFO from the Lauder Venture Corporation. We have Christine Fremont, who's the Global NS Franchise Finance Head. Well, that is quite a mouthful, Novartis. And we have Tony Shafar, who is a portfolio CFO and an exec coach. So welcome. Good to see you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Chris.
So, look, there's no doubt that the last few years have been really tricky for everybody. And, you know, whether it's the pandemic or cost of living crisis, you know, war in Europe, you know, all these things have been impacting on us in the workplace, at home. And a lot of burden's been put on finance leadership, you know, to make things happen. Whether it's financial management or adopting to this new environment. So the first question I want to ask from the heart is how are you? How are you doing? And I love the sort of tip that people give when it comes to really checking in on people, where you ask it twice. Okay, because so many people just say, yeah, I'm fine. And then you move on.
So I joked with my team this morning that I was doing this session on avoiding mental burnout and agility, having come off the back of a lot of sort of late nights and hard work as we sort of drive our change agenda in the team. So I would say, in all honesty, I'm pretty tired, but I'm really excited to be here today. I'm really excited to be sharing thoughts on this, because this is something that's really that I'm really passionate about. And so I feel invigorated to be here and part of the session, although tired, Chris. So thank you for asking.
Well, I appreciate your honesty, and it's great that you're here. Christine.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that most of the people, when you ask, how are you, they'll say, I'm fine, I'm doing good, I'm doing great. And then they move on to something. It's not the real answer that you're hearing. So you need to say it twice, like you said, but no, really, how are you? Fortunately for me, I'm just back from 2 weeks vacation. So I'm doing pretty good.
Hester, close your ears.
So fully rested and really happy to take part of this discussion and this summit, because I think it's great to hear ideas from all those leaders in finance. And we're really going through exciting times, a lot of change, a lot of pressure, but I think it's still exciting. A lot of things coming on, and I think we can definitely get good things out of these changing moments.
Good stuff. And Tony, you know, look, we all put on a bit of a work mask. I think that's been fairly well defined in the HR world. You know, do you recognize people who kind of skim over that subject?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm good. Thanks personally. I mean, I think a lot of people do. I think a lot of people feel that they're asked the question, but the other person doesn't really care. And actually, it's just a simple pleasantry. But I think actually the more we can be open with others about when we're facing challenges, the more likely they're to reciprocate. So there's a bit of that vulnerability. The more you can be vulnerable, the more you're opening it up to others to share that and start normalizing that thing that actually, yeah, it's okay that saying things are a bit more challenging, and I'm finding things more tough at the beginning, at the moment. So yeah, I think the more we can be open and honest and not just see it as a simple pleasantry, the more likely people are to share when things are more challenging.
That's a really interesting point, actually, sort of recognizing that it's not just a sort of salutation, it's actually a question. But look, this is a really serious subject, right? So are we actually looking at a sort of post-pandemic mental health crisis? Because there's a lot in the news at the moment. I think a lot of people in work are trying to balance, remote working and getting back into the office. We're hearing things that people are reluctant to get back into the office, certainly with the same patterns as before. Do you feel that we're seeing sort of a mental health, maybe not a crisis, but mental health surface in our organizations and finance leadership? And, Hester, I'll come to you first, and then Christine.
I think it's really, I think the pandemic time, as everyone I think recognizes, was extremely challenging for people. And I think what I observed during that time, and certainly in myself, was that the boundaries between work and home were completely eroded. And I actually think I'm a big believer in hybrid working. I think it's great in terms of supporting people's work-life balances, but I think there does need to be a recognition that hybrid working actually creates no definitive start and end to your day in the way that going into the office does. So I think a lot of people feel reluctant because they lose some of that flexibility without necessarily recognizing the benefits that being in the office creates in terms of having those boundaries. And I certainly recognize it in myself that if I'm working from home, my day starts at 7 and it goes on until whenever I eventually log off, and there's nothing that stops it. So I do think that's a real challenge. And I think we as leaders have to be very cognizant of trying to help people navigate those new demands of hybrid working and what that really means.
And, I think that's a very common problem, and people would have recognized that during the pandemic. I certainly recognize it. But do you think that could cause a mental health challenge? Does it lead to burnout if you don't get that right?
Absolutely. I think if you are not able, if there aren't those clear boundaries and there's no definitive space between home and work, I think those conflicts that people will regularly feel when they're working, and finance is very demanding. It's a very demanding role. None of us are in finance because we want an easy life. We're in it because we enjoy the challenges. But those things that can build that pressure in terms of leading to mental burnout, feeling guilty because you've not got time to spend with your family or partner or your friends. There's no natural release time where you step away from work. I think without that time where you carve it out for yourself for the things that matter outside of work, you genuinely open yourself up to not having any time to reinvigorate or refresh yourself. And I think that time is really key. I think, and lots of people say I'm not saying anything new here, but you really do need to look after yourself to be able to look after your role, your team, the things that are going on around you. Excellent.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the honesty. Christine, you're obviously in a different position. You just stepped off the plane, refreshed, recharged. But, how is this sort of surfacing within organizations at the moment?
Well, we learned a lot during COVID. It's true that working remotely 100% of the time, we were fortunate. In Novartis, they deployed loads of tools to help us remain sane and things like that. And the best things that we've learned is really, even when you work from home, you need the transition from work to home. So you need to build a routine, whatever it is that you listen to music or you go for a walk or whatever it is that you feel comfortable and you want. But create that transition that usually exists when you leave the office and you come home. And that way you're really clean and you try to be, I mean, you need to be disciplined. And I think we are role models for our teams and organization. So I try really not to send email too late at night, not sending emails during the weekend. I'm at work during the weekend. That's my decision, but I'm going to try to hold on to those emails and send them Monday morning, not to encourage people working late. And definitely I tell my team that they're not gaining any point for sending emails late and over the weekend. I'm not encouraging this. I mean, I've been in the US in the 2011, 2012, where, I mean, it was almost a race that the first one who sent the email on the Saturday morning at 7 a.m. or the latest at night that beats the one, and it was encouraged. And I mean, this is disastrous. I mean, people are sleeping with their phone on and looking at emails at 3 o'clock in the morning. And this is not good. So I try really to be a role model for my team, not try to do it, and be clear with the team that they're not gaining any point for doing this. I mean, you can decide to work, and we put that footnote in our emails in Novartis saying, I encourage work flexibility. I'm not sending this email for you to read it right now. Read it when you choose to work on things like that. So this is really good, but we need to acknowledge, especially with working from home, where people might decide to take a little bit of time during the day to take care of kids and work a little bit after dinner or earlier in the morning before they go to school. So we need to accept this and really allow people to have a little bit of a different work schedule. 9 to 5 is no longer the norm. So, of course, if you have a team, what I encourage in my team is to have minimum time that we can all have meetings. So I said usually between 10 and 3, 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., I want everybody to work most of the time. And so people that are not early mornings, they can start at 10. And people who want to have the afternoon a little bit more with kids or to do sports or other activities, they can start really early and at 3, they're done. So you need to allow them the flexibility. So I think that's really important. Thank you.
I really like that. I like, it's almost like you're talking about a sort of structured flexibility. It's like there's flexibility, but don't sort of kill yourself in the flexibility. It's probably not the appropriate thing to say, actually, but sorry about Tony, save me. You know, what do you see in terms of, you know, how this is surfacing within organizations, and maybe touch on that sort of that negative culture that, you know, staying up late or working at the weekends and, I don't know, getting a pizza on the Friday and having that badge of honor that you worked all weekend. You know, how do we sort of stop that? Or is that the right thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of what both Hester and Christine said, I completely agree with, you know, but knowing the theory, I mean, it's not rocket science what we're talking about, establishing a good routine and knowing that theory, but it's about doing it, it's about actually putting it into practice. And I think what comes to mind is, as leaders, we have a duty to actually show by example. And it's all very well saying, right, I don't expect you to be sending emails at this particular time, or saying certain things that you don't expect. I'm not expecting, if I send an email at this particular time, I don't expect you to respond. But if people see that as leaders we're behaving in certain ways, they will almost expect that I need to reciprocate. I need to align the way I'm behaving with the way they're doing things. So I think it becomes more about actually doing what you're doing, how you're actually behaving as a leader. If you're saying certain things, but doing something different, which is quite contradictory, it gets confusing. And the people that are maybe working for you are less clear as to where they stand. Okay, they are saying we shouldn't be working at the weekend, but they're sending emails saying don't respond, but they're sending emails. So therefore I feel that sense of obligation that I'm maybe not as committed as them. Whereas actually, if they have this approach, I'm not doing anything, don't bother sending me anything at the weekend because I'm not doing it, they'll have that permission to behave in that way because they've seen that's the way that other people are behaving. So I think it very much comes to that recognition of how we're behaving as a leader and what impact is it having on the other things. And the other thing that also, just to I always sort of like to think about is we are always so focused, very much as finance leaders being a support function, we're forever serving other parts of the business. And we're very much focused on, things that are important, but also things that are really urgent. And there's also aspects that are important, but are maybe less urgent. And that's very often things that for ourselves, so like taking that time out, doing some exercise, stepping away from the desk, that's never going to be urgent because it's for yourself, but it doesn't make it any less important in adhering to a deadline from your boss. And I think it's really important to have that balance.
Yeah.
And to have the confidence. And again, that very often comes from seeing the way leaders behave and our peers behave. And the more we can encourage, or we can behave in that way as a leader, we will encourage others to also behave, follow suit.
I think, Tony, sorry, Chris, I was just going to say, I think that's a really good point. I think the other thing is that we have to be really honest with our teams. In finance, there are deadlines. There are certain times where actually we are working to deliver something, and that needs to be an urgent priority. So it's not right for us to sit here and say at every point, that's got to be deprioritized. But I think the key thing is around those urgent deadlines, you need to create the space for people to see that that is a month-end thing, or that's a specific time period where those expectations are that. But actually, for the rest of the month, for example, that balance is really important, and it's finding that balance throughout the month and having that understanding. And to your point, role modeling. Hey, month end, I'm going to be really busy. I'm going to work some really long hours. But hey, the next week, I'm going to make sure I take a lunch break. I'm going to be logging off at 5. I'm not going to be working in the evening. It's about making it real for people.
Yeah, I love that. I think what I'm taking away from that is we truly have to lead by example. There's no halfway house on this. I'm conscious that my team's listening when I comment, right? But I put my hand up. Okay, I sometimes work in the evenings, I sometimes work in the weekends, and I actually do my best not to send those emails. What I have started to rely on is that scheduled send button, but I haven't seen it from the other side. And I can only apologize for this because they are listening. But because what happens is 8 o'clock on Monday morning, they get 10 emails from me. Now, that's not cool either, right? So I think there is something about leading by example and actually having to sort of show the change. But look, I just want to pick up on one point, which is how this whole sort of session was originally framed. We've had leadership publicly coming out recently saying that they're burnt out or they're fatigued, they've had enough. Politicians, we've had 2 high-profile politicians come out recently. Do you think those sorts of conversations are helping with this kind of, conversation, the reality around certain things, whether it's, politicians or leaderships, we still have pressure jobs. Tony, what's your sort of take on seeing leadership publicly talk about stress and strain?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's not great that they're having it, but it's great that they're obviously talking about it, and it becomes less of a stigma attached around it. And I think the more, that encourages other people, but within our organization, it still feels quite distant. And I think within organizations, if you can be more open and more vulnerable and realize there's actual strength in that vulnerability, the more you are likely to encourage others to open up about any challenges they're facing. Because if they are facing a particular challenge and they don't want it to be career limiting within the organization so that they're afraid to vocalize it, if you as a leader start talking about the challenges that you're facing, they're far more likely to be open and honest about it, because they see actually they feel that they're going to be understood. They're less likely to feel that they're going to be judged. They're less likely to feel that it's going to be career limiting, all of which just helps them to be more open and encouraging, and will also encourage you to be more open going forward. So I again, coming back to what we were talking about before about leading by example, I think that's also really important in recognizing that vulnerability isn't really being weak.
So, Christine, this same question to you, but, around, does it help when leaders talk openly like this? But also, as finance is a support team, and as Hester said, we sometimes have some very tight deadlines. Is finance sort of suffering in silence because they almost have this culture of, just getting it done?
That's a good question, Chris. And I'm sure in certain organizations, they do suffer in silence. In my team, definitely, I make sure they're not. It is really helpful to see, and I see more even LinkedIn profile where the job title is burnout or taking time off to re-energize. And I think this is brilliant. I think it really helps, and we need to talk about these, especially these high profile, because we've seen them as invincible. And every time we feel weak, we feel I'm not good enough. I'm not as strong as they are. So definitely we need to lead by example. We need to be vulnerable and show and even acknowledge our issues and struggles. But the other thing is really, people don't burn out just because they work long hours. They burn out because they lack the purpose. They don't feel recognition. Just working long hours never cause burnout, just that part. It's everything else. It's not feeling recognized, not feeling the support, not feeling the purpose. All of these combined with long hours definitely can lead to burnout. So really in my team, I try to make sure there's a purpose, make sure there's recognition, make sure there's a team spirit. So we're all in there together. A month-end close is not a one-man show. So if any part is not doing its job, none of us can close the book. So we're all in there together. And if someone has too much to do, maybe other can help to do things. How can we pitch in and try to support each other to make sure that we're all in there together and build this team? But this is our responsibility as CFOs and as leaders. You're in mute, Chris.
Yeah, you get the prize. Hester, you've talked about a peak of work recently, and you're here today, tired after that. Do you feel that finance teams are sort of suffering in silence? And do you think that finance teams and finance leadership have had a particularly difficult time because of all the uncertainty that within business? Or do you think that's sort of shared across the business?
I think Christine made a really good point that actually it's cultural. I don't think necessarily all finance teams will be suffering in silence. I think some will. I think that is something about, and I think there's a piece for people to reflect on. If you feel like you have to sit in silence in your organization, then that is not the norm. Not every organization is like that. So ask yourself whether you're in the right place. I think the reality is that everyone is having to deal with that uncertainty. It manifests itself in different ways and different pressures. I think the demands on finance and on finance leaders is to continually drive change and efficiency and optimize the way in which we do things. And it's really interesting because actually the demands are, you think you've addressed someone's challenge or someone's request, and then they come back and they want more. And sometimes it feels like there's that never-ending request for more and more and more. And in reality, the reason people are asking for more and more and more is they're dealing with their own problems. And I think sometimes creating the headspace to step back, engage with your key stakeholders to try and understand, well, what problems are they facing? If you're in an organization, we're a collective. These are all shared problems. Let's not create an industry of busy work. Let's really challenge ourselves to think about where the value add lies and focus on delivering that. And then we can sort of move around and think about the other things. But let's really be clear on what's going to move the dial for people.
So it's a sort of discipline around prioritization sounds really important to make sure you're not wasting energy, right?
Absolutely. And I think it links back into Christine's point about purpose. I think if people are clear on why they're doing something, I think that really helps with people's energy. I was lucky enough to do a course by a gentleman called Bill Mitchell, who talked about sort of performance energy and managing your energy. And it's sort of the typical bell curve. And if you're at that sort of top peak, then you're in the ideal place. I think when people feel they've got that purpose and that understanding, that really helps to be in that zone. It's when you start to feel like the work you're doing isn't valued, it's not really important, it's not being used for anything, I think that's when it becomes very taxing from a sort of mental perspective.
Interesting. So
just picking up on that, I think what Hester was saying, but also what Christine was saying about purpose, feeling supported, and the fact that you don't get burnout just from working long hours. I think there's a distinction around stress and pressure, because in finance there's always going to be pressure. There's deadlines, we've got month end, you've got forecasts, you've got different scenario planning, whatever it may be, and there will be deadlines around that, and that's going to result in pressure for a period of time. But it's when you have got when those deadlines are never ending, when you're just working hard and you're just constantly under supported, and there's just not enough resource, when there is a lack of purpose, when all those things are thrown into the mix, that's no longer pressure. That's just stress. That's more likely to lead to stress, and that's more likely to lead to burnout. So I don't think there's anything, I think we can't escape the fact that there will be times when the job is a bit more pressured and there are deadlines. I mean, the nature of the job, invariably there are going to be deadlines. But I think that having that distinction between pressure, asking yourself, am I under pressure, or is this an ongoing, situation of stress? I think they're very different things.
And Tony, just sort of talking about possible solutions, right? Just conscious of time. How do we kind of understand our own causes of stress or understand our own sort of situation? Because, it doesn't come up and sort of smack you in the face until you're out of energy, right? It's almost, I've used this analogy before, but it's, you look after your laptop battery in a very different way that you look after your brain or your body. You would plug it in before you go on a journey because you need it. You would nurture that battery to make sure, it's ready for a meeting, but you don't seem to approach yourself in the same way. So how can you kind of understand when you are sort of in decline? I suppose that sounds like a big word, but how can you recognize it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's probably simple, but not very easy. And it's around having more self-awareness, really slowing down to better understand yourself. Are you more stressed than normal? Are you snappier, shorter with colleagues, with family members, etc.? None of this is rocket science. It's all stuff that we know. But as you said, Chris, do we actually treat it with the same seriousness as we do our job? If we actually looked after ourselves and really thought about this, I'm going to take this as seriously. I'm going to really dial into, okay, how am I feeling? What triggers me? And really took time out on a regular basis to reflect on that. Then we become a lot more self-aware and a lot more knowledgeable about it. But again, it's like one of those things that's really important, but never urgent. So you never do it because you're so focused, I've just got to get I've got to get the day job done. I've got to get that done. And then by the end of the day, you're maybe very tired and you just want to sit down in front of the TV or go out for a drink or whatever it may be, that element of maybe escapism just to get away from it. So I think none of it is stuff that anyone's going to go, wow, I could never do that. But it's how much do they actually want to do it?
Yeah. It's, I want to have the body of an Olympian. And I kind of think it's simple, right? I need to eat less and exercise more, but I haven't done it yet.
Surprise me.
Yeah. But in terms of sort of managing it and, jokes aside, the practical side to this, Hester, do you have any sort of good habits or any ways of kind of managing your own stress? I'm fortunate enough to have a dog that needs walking a huge amount. I walk the dog a lot, and actually during the pandemic, I think probably saved me. There was a lot going on. But how would you go about it?
So I think Tony makes a really valuable point. It is about self-reflection, and people need to be aware of their own signs. So I'm not a crier normally. If I'm very stressed and I'm sort of tipping towards the edge of unmanageable, I get very teary and I get very snappy. But I've got colleagues who simply withdraw into themselves and become very quiet, and that for them is a sign that they're sort of moving down that unmanageable balance. In terms of how do I go about managing, I'm a very keen runner, and very keen sort of sports enthusiast. And for me, carving out that time in the day, which is selfish time, but it's also selfless time, because it's that point where I recharge and I can come back and bring the required positivity to keep myself and the team around me moving forward. So I make sure that, you know, I do carve out time to run. So, you know, I used to be a morning runner. I now have a 1-year-old, so that's not so easy anymore. But I do make time most lunchtimes to go out for a run, go to the gym, and that's really, really important and sacred time for me. The other thing that I recognize is I actually genuinely have more control about what time my day at work starts than I necessarily do about what time my day at work. So if I want to carve out time for the family, for friends, actually just taking advantage. I mean, Christine talks about core working hours, and we have something similar. Taking advantage of those core working hours, where I say, you know, actually, I'm going to be in work at 9:30 today because I'm going to see a friend for a quick breakfast, or I'm actually going to spend a bit more time with my family. Just carving that out and recognizing the importance of that is something that I do and would strongly advocate. There's sort of more control over the morning than the evening.
Sounds great. I like the idea of a GENCFO running club at some point, just to get us all going.
More than happy to champion that one, Chris.
Excellent. So, you know, Christine, I really like the sort of the habits that we're talking about now, the real practical things that we can do. And also, you know, do you recognise what Hester's saying, that maybe you're more in control of your morning than your evening? You know, I have a young family. I definitely understand that. You know, that I can have breakfast with them much more easily than I can dinner, which tends to be about sort of 4:30.
Clearly, I recognize that. I mean, you decide at what time you get in the office, but you often not decide at what time you get out of the office. Once you're there, you're stuck in the machine, and things just happen. As Esther, I have 2 tricks. I run. That's for sanity, and for sanity of my team mainly. I remember in when I was younger in New York and I was less self-aware, after a meeting where I was maybe a bit snappy, I came back to my office and my running shoes were on my desk. Good signal from my team to say, maybe you should go for a run. And I really enjoy it. And I now start with new teams and tell them that story and say, one day I'm snappy, just put sneakers on running shoes on my desk and I'll understand that I need to go for a run. And the other thing that I try really to do is to celebrate more. So I try to celebrate all those achievements during the day, especially at month end and things like that. So at first I was doing it for me, and now I do it with the team. So I teach them to celebrate all those little milestones that we're achieving. And sometimes I even try to celebrate some failures because we learn from them. So we need, and again, I mean, I cannot celebrate all the failures. It might not be a good thing, but we need to celebrate some of them because we're learning. So for me, celebration is something that comes more and more, almost on a daily basis. Small celebration, just say you did it. That's one milestone. It's done. Take 5 minutes, just be proud of you, celebrate, and then move on to your next chapter. So that's.
And that talks to this positive culture, doesn't it, that you're trying to create? I really like that. Hester, go on.
No, I was just going to say our CEO has a wonderful analogy that is, you can be very busy looking up the mountain and seeing your direction of travel and thinking it's insurmountable, but don't forget to sort of stop, turn around, have a quick look back down the mountain and see how far you've come, because sometimes you just need to recognize the progress that you've made.
Absolutely. And I can tell you, I am absolutely nailing my couch to 5K at the moment. So
fabulous.
Who knows, you know, it could be a marathon next year. So Tony, you know, I'm conscious of time, I'm just wrapping things up here. You know, what would you say to people, you know, what's the sort of number one takeaway in terms of, you know, someone who may be struggling a little bit? Obviously, there's some great tips there. But what would be your sort of number one takeaway?
I think be open and honest. Try and maybe take small steps. Maybe if you're really struggling with certain things, don't necessarily feel that you have to say everything, but find someone maybe within your office, someone who will understand that you can start to be a bit more open and honest with around the challenges that you're facing. And the more open and honest you are with them, the more likely that they're they are going to be reciprocate, and you'll feel maybe less alone. I mean, certainly in finance, it can be a pretty lonely job. It can certainly be as a finance leader. You very often are like really thinking when no one really understands the role, they don't understand the challenges, they don't really understand there's not that many people I can turn to. And the more open and honest you can be, the more likely things are just going to feel that bit lighter.
I like it. I think a lot of people would recognize, solo leadership. It's tough sometimes. Christine, I come to you next, and then Hester. Your sort of number one tip takeaway.
I would tend to agree with Tony. I mean, we need to talk about it, and even if you don't want to talk about the reason or the cause or whatever, just say I'm going through a tough spot. I might be struggling a bit this week. So people will understand if you're less productive, if you're less smiling, and they might offer support. How can I help you? Is there anything that I can do for you? But we need to start to talk about it. We need to stop hiding and thinking that it's a weakness. And that's why I think it's a good thing that some of those high value profile are saying that they're doing burnout or fatigue and they're taking some time off. I think that's wonderful.
Thank you for that. And Hester?
I think both Christine and Tony make great points. I think it sounds like we all come from a position where we work in supportive organisations where perhaps having those conversations are not necessarily easy, but things that people are open to hearing to. And there may well be people in the audience sitting there thinking, I don't think my organisation is open to hearing that. They don't want to hear that. And in which case, I think there is a piece about, and Tony talked about it, that self-reflection, which is find someone outside of work if you can't talk to someone in work, and try and build a plan in your mind as to what you need to do. And it is about taking those small steps. So actually, maybe you don't need to go into the office and announce that you're having a difficult time, or even find someone you feel comfortable talking to. Maybe you just need to take ownership for that and say, right, for my own mental well-being, I am not going to go into the office until 9:30 tomorrow because actually I'm going to have breakfast with my partner, or I'm going to carve time out to go and do something that I enjoy, because then I'm going to start the day in a more positive mindset. And that would be my alternative, which is think about the steps that you can take that don't necessarily have a huge impact. So if you're not feeling comfortable to have those conversations, there will be still things that you can do to help yourself. And it's about thinking about that and finding someone outside of work who can support you on that journey.
Excellent. Some great advice there. I'm going to wrap it up now, but thank you very much for your honesty, your openness, talking about this subject. I think it's obviously great for everyone to see, and really insightful. So thank you, Hester, Christine and Tony. And just a reminder that there is actually a mental fitness in business group on the community platform, so you can continue the conversation there. I might change the name to the running club, but yeah, if you want to continue the conversation, please join us on the Summit group, or there is a mental fitness in business group as well. And if you are looking to talk to a coach or anybody else, then do reach out to me. I do have a network of people that I can recommend. So that's it. Thanks for attending, and I hope to see you on the community platform. And thanks again, Hester, Christine and Tony. See you very soon.